For decades, Carole Middleton lived in the shadows of royalty. She was never one to chase the limelight, never one to stir controversy. She played her role with quiet precision, offering unwavering support to her daughter, Kate Middleton, as she navigated the complexities of royal life. She watched, listened, and understood the unspoken rules of Buckingham Palace. But at 70 years old, something changed. The silence that had once been her greatest strength shattered in an instant, and the words she finally spoke sent shockwaves through the monarchy. The revelation wasn't just a slip of the tongue or an offhand remark. It was a statement so bold, so unflinching, that it tore through the palace walls like a storm. The headlines exploded overnight. The whispers turned into a roar, and suddenly Carole Middleton was no longer just the mother of the future queen consort. She had become a force in her own right, and her words threatened to expose what had been carefully hidden for years. At the center of this storm stood one woman, Queen Camilla, the woman who had fought tooth and nail to be accepted into the royal fold, the woman whose very existence had been a point of contention within the monarchy since the day she stepped into the picture. And now, she found herself in the crosshairs of a battle she never saw coming. But what made Carole speak now? For years she had endured the quiet dismissals, the subtle undermining, the veiled comments about her background, about Kate's place in the royal hierarchy. She had seen it all, the orchestrated power plays, the carefully crafted narratives, the shifting allegiances within the palace walls. And she had kept her silence, knowing that in a world like this, words had consequences. But there comes a moment when silence is no longer an option, a moment when the weight of everything unsaid becomes unbearable, and that moment had arrived. The tension had been simmering for years, buried beneath royal smiles and public courtesies. But behind closed doors, Carole Middleton and Queen Camilla had been locked in a quiet, unspoken battle for influence. Their rivalry wasn't public, nor was it acknowledged outright, but it was there, etched into every carefully staged royal appearance, every decision made about Kate's role, every moment where power was subtly exercised. And now, the illusion of peace had crumbled. What had been whispered in palace corridors for years was finally being spoken out loud, and the monarchy found itself standing on the edge of yet another crisis. This was no ordinary royal drama. This wasn't a fleeting tabloid scandal that could be brushed aside. This was something deeper, something far more dangerous, a reckoning that threatened to shake the very foundation of the royal family. Carole Middleton had broken the silence, but the truth she revealed had only just begun to unravel. But to understand why this moment is so explosive, we need to go back to where it all began. Behind the royal smiles, a silent war was raging. It was never spoken, never acknowledged, but those who understood the inner workings of the monarchy saw it. The moment Kate Middleton emerged as a serious contender for the throne, a quiet but unmistakable tension took root. On the surface, it seemed as if two women, Queen Camilla and Carole Middleton, had no real reason for conflict. One was a product of aristocracy steeped in tradition, and her place in royal life long solidified. The other was self-made, a woman who had built her family's success from nothing and whose daughter now stood on the precipice of history. But power, influence, and legacy have a way of forcing people into opposition, whether they intend it or not. From the moment Prince William introduced Kate to the world, Camilla had her doubts. She had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of the royal family, understanding every subtle cue, every silent expectation. To her, Kate Middleton, despite her beauty and grace, was still an outsider. She lacked royal blood, the generational ties that had defined the upper echelons of British society for centuries. Camilla, who had fought so hard to be accepted, understood the brutal reality of the institution that belonged, who didn't, and more importantly, who was merely being tolerated. In her eyes, Kate was the latter. Carole Middleton saw it all. She watched as Camilla, always careful, always measured, made her presence felt in ways that never seemed direct but were impossible to ignore. It was in the way she carried herself at events, in the way she subtly reinforced the idea of a hierarchy of who was important and who wasn't. It was in the quiet remarks, the strategic positioning, and the whispered doubts about whether Kate truly had the resilience for royal life. Carole, fiercely protective of her daughter, did what she had always done. She remained silent. But her silence was not submission, it was patience. A mother's understanding that in a world like this there would be battles, and sometimes the best way to win was to let the enemy reveal themselves first. But silence does not mean ignorance. As the years went on, Carole saw something chilling echoes of the past. She had watched Diana, the beloved princess who had captured the hearts of millions, be slowly broken down by the very institution she had married into. She had seen how the palace could isolate, how it could strip a woman of her individuality, her independence, even her sanity. She knew the dangers of being too trusting, of believing that love alone was enough to survive in the monarchy. And as Kate stepped deeper into the royal world, Carole saw the warning signs. She saw the same playbook being used. But Carole was not Diana, and more importantly, neither was Kate. This time, things would be different. And speaking of Diana, her shadow still loomed large over Camilla, shaping the tensions even further. No matter how much time passed, one thing never changed. Camilla could never escape the legacy of Diana. It loomed over her, unrelenting, an invisible force woven into the very fabric of the monarchy. Even in death, Diana remained a towering presence, her influence shaping public perception, her memory refusing to fade. The people had adored her, not just as a princess, but as a symbol of kindness, of warmth, of a modern royal who connected with the world in a way no one else could. And for Camilla, that devotion was a curse she could never break free from. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how carefully she repositioned herself, she would always be the woman who had stepped into Diana's place, the other woman, the unwelcome reminder of a past filled with betrayal. For years, Camilla had worked tirelessly to change that image. She had remained composed, taken on royal duties, and avoided controversy. She had done everything in her power to rewrite the narrative, to distance herself from the scandal that had once defined her. But there was one thing she could not control: comparison. And the moment Kate Middleton entered the royal scene, those comparisons reignited like wildfire. The world saw something familiar in Kate: the grace, the poise, the way she carried herself with an effortless charm. It was as if Diana's spirit had returned, and the public was quick to draw the parallels. The future Queen of England, another beloved princess, another symbol of warmth and relatability. Kate had what Camilla never could: adore without controversy. And that alone was enough to reopen old wounds. Carole Middleton saw it too. She had been watching, observing the way the palace operated, the way power was wielded behind closed doors. She knew that Diana's fate had been sealed not by one person, but by an institution that had refused to protect her, and she wasn't about to let history repeat itself. She saw how the media adored Kate, how the public placed her on the same pedestal they had once reserved for Diana. She also saw the dangers that came with it. Camilla had spent decades trying to cement her place in the royal family, and now a new generation had arrived. One that, once again, had the potential to overshadow her. Carole understood exactly what that meant. She understood how resentment could build, how silent battles for influence could be fought in the most unexpected ways. This wasn't just about Kate anymore. This was about control, over public image, over the monarchy's future, over who held the real power behind the throne. And this battle for influence wasn't just passive, it was strategic, calculated, and relentless. Carole Middleton and Queen Camilla never openly fought, but those close to them knew they were locked in a high-stakes game of influence. It was a battle fought in whispers, in carefully placed words, in the subtle maneuvering of power that only those who understood the monarchy's inner workings could recognize. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public feuds, but the rivalry was there, lingering beneath the surface, shaping decisions, altering narratives, and defining the very role Kate Middleton would play in the royal family. Camilla had spent decades perfecting the art of palace politics. She understood how power truly worked, not in grand declarations, but in the smallest of gestures. She knew that real influence wasn't about what was said, but about what was implied. At public events, she asserted her position without a single word, using tradition, hierarchy, and the weight of royal history to maintain control. She had fought too hard for her place beside King Charles, and endured too much to let her authority be questioned. And now, with Kate Middleton rising in prominence, Camilla wasn't about to step aside. Every glance, every slight adjustment in protocol, every carefully curated moment in the public eye sent a clear message: she was the queen consort, and she wasn't going anywhere. Carole, though quieter, was no less powerful. She had built her family from the ground up and shaped her daughter's future with a determination that no royal title could diminish. Unlike Camilla, she didn't rely on aristocratic traditions or royal connections. Her power came from something far more unshakable: her role as a mother. While Camilla played the long game within the palace, Carole worked from the outside, ensuring Kate never faced the institution alone. She understood the pressures, the expectations, the quiet manipulations that had crushed Diana. and she had no intention of letting her daughter meet the same fate. The power struggle became evident in key moments. The wedding planning, where Carole fought for Kate's individuality to shine through, while Camilla pushed for the weight of royal customs to take precedence. The media narratives, where stories painted Camilla as a steadying force in the monarchy while subtly casting doubt on Kate's ability to step into her future role. Even within the family itself, there was an unspoken contest who held more sway over Kate's decision, who had more influence over the next generation. It was a silent war, but make no mistake, it was a war nonetheless. It was a game of chess between two strong-willed women, and neither was willing to lose. But Carole knew when to pick her battles, and she waited for the perfect moment to strike. On Kate's wedding day, the world saw a fairy tale, a royal spectacle unlike any other: grace, elegance, and the promise of a future queen stepping into her destiny. The streets of London were lined with millions of adoring fans. The global audience reached the billions, and the monarchy for one day was untouchable. But behind the scenes, beneath the surface of polished smiles and carefully rehearsed traditions, the wedding was something else entirely. It was a battlefield of influence, a silent war waged not in open confrontation, but in the details of the guest lists, the seating arrangements, the unspoken rules of power that dictated who mattered and who did not. And at the heart of it all stood two women, each determined to leave their mark: Carole Middleton and Queen Camilla. For Carole, this was more than just a royal wedding. This was her daughter's moment, the culmination of years of sacrifice, support, and quiet determination. She wanted the ceremony to reflect Kate's warmth, her modernity, and her ability to connect with people beyond the rigid confines of royal protocol. Carole envisioned a wedding that blended tradition with personality, a moment that felt intimate despite its grandeur. But for Camilla, this was not simply a marriage. It was an affirmation of royal hierarchy, a display of power that needed to follow the centuries-old script. She saw the wedding as a moment to reinforce the institution, to uphold the rigid customs that had governed the monarchy for generations, and in her mind, there was no room for sentimentality. This was duty, not emotion. The tensions between the two women reached a boiling point in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. Behind closed doors, there were quiet disagreements over the guest list. Carole wanted to ensure that Kate's family and close friends were well represented, that the Middletons had a place of prominence on a day that belonged as much to them as it did to the Windsors. Camilla, however, saw things differently. She believed that the guest list should reflect the weight of royal tradition, favoring aristocrats and long-standing allies of the crown over outsiders. It was a subtle but unmistakable message. There was a hierarchy, and the Middletons were not at the top of it. Even the smallest details became points of contention. Camilla insisted that the ceremony adhere strictly to royal customs, reinforcing the monarchy's legacy in every frame, every moment, every carefully staged interaction. Carole, ever mindful of Kate's happiness, fought for personal touches and gestures that would make the day feel like more than just another carefully choreographed display of royal pageantry. And though the wedding itself unfolded flawlessly in the public eye, the undercurrents of this quiet struggle were undeniable, because behind the fairy tale, a larger war had already begun. The real battle would come years later, not over the wedding, but over the future of the royal heirs. Because once Prince George and Princess Charlotte were born, a new question arose: who would truly shape the upbringing of the future king? After years of silent endurance, Carole finally reached her limit. She had watched, waited, and held her tongue as quiet battles played out behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. She had endured the subtle dismissals, the calculated maneuvers, and the quiet struggle for influence over her daughter and grandchildren. But every person has a breaking point, and Carole Middleton has finally reached hers. And when she spoke, the world listened. It happened during a private royal gathering, a seemingly routine event, one of many where the family came together behind closed doors to discuss the future. But this time, the conversation shifted, and so did the power dynamics in the room. The subject? The upbringing of Prince George and Princess Charlotte. The moment Camilla made a dismissive remark about Carole's role in the royal children's lives, the air changed. To the Queen Consort, it was just another assertion of royal hierarchy, an unspoken reminder that the Middletons, no matter how close to the throne, were not part of the institution. Their influence, their connection to the future king, was secondary to the traditions of the monarchy. But to Carole, it was something else entirely. It was a line that had been crossed. For the first time, Carole didn't stay silent. She confronted Camilla directly, her voice cutting through years of restraint. She didn't just challenge Camilla's influence over the children, she questioned everything. The quiet manipulation, The years of undermining Kate and the carefully controlled public narratives painted Camilla as the steady hand of the monarchy while downplaying the struggles others had endured. Those in the room didn't speak, didn't intervene. They knew what was happening. This was more than a personal dispute, it was a reckoning. And then, just as quickly as it began, the confrontation was over. But its impact was just beginning. Someone, perhaps intentionally, leaked the details to the press. Within hours, the headlines exploded. Speculation ran wild. What had Carole Middleton said that was so damning? What had she revealed that put Camilla so carefully protected, so strategically positioned on the defensive? The carefully curated image of the Queen consort was suddenly under threat, and the stability of the monarchy was shaken once again. But this confrontation did more than spark gossip. It brought Camilla's entire past back into public scrutiny. The ghosts of history, the scandals long buried, the whispered accusations that had been silenced by time all began to resurface. And for the first time in decades, the woman who had fought so hard to secure her place in the monarchy found herself fighting a battle she never expected. A battle she might not be able to win. The press had spent years trying to move past Camilla's history, carefully reshaping her image, repositioning her as a steady force within the monarchy. The narrative had been crafted with precision. Camilla was no longer the woman who had once stood in the shadows of a doomed marriage, no longer the outsider who had played a role in Diana's heartbreak. The public had been asked to accept her, to forgive, to forget. But then, Carole Middleton shattered that illusion. With one confrontation, one moment of defiance, she forced the world to look back. And what they saw was a past that refused to stay buried. Almost overnight, old wounds were reopened. The media, once hesitant to revisit the Charles-Diana scandal, now found themselves with no choice. The people wanted answers. Had Camilla's influence truly ended with Diana, or had she simply found new ways to exert control? Every moment was re-examined with fresh scrutiny of her role in the affair. The whispered conversations, the hidden phone calls that had once scandalized a nation. But it didn't stop there, because this time, it wasn't just about what had happened decades ago. It was about what was happening now, and the questions were only growing louder. Behind the palace gates, Camilla had spent years solidifying her position, ensuring that her influence extended far beyond her title. But now, questions surfaced about the extent of that power. Did she hold sway over royal decisions? Had she played a role in shaping Charles's vision for the monarchy in ways the public had never known? Financial dealings, favoritism within the royal circles, the unspoken alliances that had kept her untouchable for so long? Everything was now under a microscope. The whispers became a roar. Was Camilla still playing the same games she once did behind Diana's back? Had she truly evolved into a figure of stability, or had she simply perfected the art of quiet manipulation? The timing couldn't have been worse. The monarchy was already fragile, still adjusting to the loss of Queen Elizabeth, struggling to maintain its relevance in a rapidly changing world. And now, with these allegations tearing through the headlines, it found itself on the edge of a crisis. Buckingham Palace scrambled into full damage control, deploying carefully crafted statements, orchestrating public appearances designed to reinforce unity. But the cracks were already too deep. And now, the pressure wasn't just on Camilla. The entire royal family faced a reckoning. Carole's words didn't just shake the palace. They forced Prince William and Kate into the most difficult position of their royal lives. It was a storm they hadn't seen coming, a moment of reckoning that threatened to fracture the careful balance they had maintained for years. William, the future king, had spent his entire life preparing for duty, for responsibility, for the weight of the crown. But now he was no longer just a prince, he was a son-in-law caught between the monarchy and the woman who had raised his wife. He knew his mother-in-law was right. He had seen the quiet power struggles, the unspoken rivalries, and the way influence was wielded in ways the public never saw. He understood the frustrations that had pushed Carole to finally speak out. But acknowledging that publicly or even privately meant something far more dangerous. It meant challenging the very institution he was born to protect. It meant stepping into a battle that could unravel everything. And for a man raised under the weight of duty, that choice was nearly impossible to make. Kate, though composed in public, was reportedly shaken by the way the palace had handled the scandal. She had spent years carefully navigating her role, learning when to speak and when to remain silent. But this was different. This wasn't just another royal controversy, this was deeply personal. Her mother's words had exposed cracks in the monarchy that no one could ignore, and Kate found herself caught in the middle. Did she stand by the institution that had shaped her future, or did she stand by the woman who had protected her long before she became a princess. For King Charles, the situation was far more than a family dispute. It was an attack on the monarchy itself. Camilla had been his greatest ally, the woman he had fought to legitimize in the eyes of the public. Now her reputation was in free fall, and with it, the stability of the royal family was at risk. He moved quickly, calling for unity, urging the family to remain composed, but behind the scenes, the damage was already done. The palace's PR team scrambled into action, crafting statements redirecting the narrative, attempting to rebuild Camilla's carefully cultivated image, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. The public was watching, questioning, speculating, and for the first time in years, the monarchy found itself truly vulnerable not just to scandal, but to something far worse: doubt. And as the royal family scrambled to recover, Carole Middleton's influence only grew stronger. The British monarchy has survived wars, scandals, and betrayals. It has weathered the storms of history, emerging time and again with its traditions intact, its influence undiminished. But can it survive this? The controversy unleashed by Carole Middleton's words was unlike anything the institution had faced before. It wasn't an attack from the outside. It was a fracture from within, a challenge not just to a single member of the family, but to the very system that had upheld its power for centuries. For years, the monarchy thrived on careful control of narratives, of image, of the delicate balance between duty and personal ambition. But now, the illusion had been shattered. The world was no longer willing to accept the idea of a monarchy that operated in silence, making decisions behind gilded doors. The institution was being forced to confront its outdated traditions. Its internal divisive, is now exposed for all to see. And at the center of it all was Carole Middleton, a woman who had no title, no royal blood, yet had done what few had dared. She had challenged the very structure of royal influence. For William and Kate, the moment was defining. They were no longer just the future of the monarchy. They were now the ones who had to decide what that monarchy would look like. Would they modernize it, ushering in an era of transparency and relatability? Or would they uphold the old ways, keeping the institution rooted in tradition, even at the cost of alienating a new generation? The weight of history bore down on them, and there was no turning back. The choices they made now would determine the survival of the crown. For Camilla, the future remained uncertain. Could she regain control, restore the influence she had spent decades building, or had the damage been too great? The tide of public opinion had turned before, and she had survived. But this time, the opposition came from within. The whispers of the past had become the echoes of the present, and the question lingered, was this the moment that finally unseated her power? The battle lines were drawn, and the next moves would shape the monarchy for generations. Carole Middleton may not wear a crown, but her voice had already changed the history of the royal family forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.